Hey everyone, and welcome back to Todos Santos. This is episode 8, and today we're going to be building the resort that I was talking about last episode. This is kind of on the by the interchange that we built a couple episodes ago, and we're really filling in this corner here as kind of like a newer development, a little bit more modern than what we've worked on previously. And I think I mentioned this last time, but as we work out from the old town, everything's going to get a little newer and a little fancier and a little more, like a kind of like a more modern tourist development. So that's the kind of look I'm going for here, with a few high rises and bigger footprint buildings as well. So here, I kind of wanted to go with this tiered theme here. So we have the main resort area up here on top, and then below we're going to have a little bit of kind of like a park area beneath. And then these here are just like some smaller little satellite areas where there would be rooms and stuff, with some attached parking lots. Just a simple road that goes through here. Pretty straightforward. Right, and here I wanted to do kind of like some little bump outs in between these parking spots here, and these would really be like drop-off areas. I do have parking enabled for some portions of these in the game, but it's really supposed to be like a pickup drop-off area. But we have, to break it up a little bit, we have these islands here, which right now we're filling in with some ploppable grass, just to give it a little bit of greenery. That looks pretty nice. So I wanted to go pretty heavy into the detail of this, especially with the textures and specifically the floor textures here, the ground textures, because I'm imagining that this place is pretty new and pretty well kept. It's, we'll get to some grounds later, and it's pretty well manicured and well designed, I think. Or if you visited a real place like this, it would feel like like a nice place to be. And there's even, we have some bollards here to protect the pedestrians, which isn't something we have in too much of the city, but it's here, so that's good. And then here, I just can't, like I mentioned this before, but I just can't stand these open crosswalks where people can just cross where it doesn't make any sense, so I have to cover that up. And I decided to go with just like a little bit of an asphalt thing here, like it used to be, a big intersection or something, and they had to redo that. Yeah, and then we're going back to the tile here, making sure it all lines up. And we go back and change a little bit of this later, because we kind of end up changing the whole shape of this area, or really we kind of double the area that we have to cover here, so you'll see that in a minute. And then I'm adding in, I thought the walkway there looked a little bare, so I added in these curbs where there are windows and not doors on this building. I'm not sure exactly what this asset is, but it's a really, really cool asset, and it was a good base to build off of. I didn't really add too much other than these kind of details, but in terms of the building, yeah, it's pretty much an awesome asset. And we do a lot of landscaping in this episode, specifically around this area, because like I said, like this is a place where people would stay and they'd spend a lot of their time here. So there are spaces for them to walk around and go to different places, and it's all pretty well manicured and almost garden-like. It's somewhere that I would like to walk around, I think. And that's what I try to go for a lot, is unless I'm going for like a realistic aspect to something that kind of forgoes pedestrian friendliness, I try to make stuff that I would like to walk around or visit or even live around in some cases. In this case, I think visiting this place would be pretty cool. not much of a resort person, but still, I think there's definitely I can see the appeal of this type of place, especially when it's a well maintained, well designed place. And here we go. I wanted to have this pool kind of overlooking the lower area here, where we're going to have a little bit of a park area. And then I wanted to have kind of like a couple smaller pools to kind of represent, hot tubs or just smaller pools, because that's usually something you find at an area like this, kind of a higher end resort, is there's usually one big pool and then, or even multiple larger pools, and then there are some, hot tubs, which are usually not for kids. It's nice to have an area where adults can go and relax. So now we're working on this kind of transition here between the upper part and the lower part. I'm just using these great concrete wall networks to kind of just cover up all those ugly cliffs. And we'll cover this all up later with some ploppable asphalt or pavement or something. And that'll make it look nice and seamless. And we have these cliff assets here. These are kind of a base. These are a nice base that you can then go back and cover up with grass or other rocks or something. But it's a nice replacement kind of for the not the vanilla cliff texture, but whatever your theme cliff texture is, if it's just not doing it for a given area. And then just smoothing out the terrain here. We'll come back to that later, but now we're getting back to this. So I'm putting down some pathways here around the building. I wanted to, because people do end up going to some different areas here, like I put some PPGs down and stuff like that. And so people do end up walking around. So I wanted to have kind of like a realistic, semi-realistic path that people would actually walk. Later we go back through and add some inside the building, so people actually will, go in the front entrance and come out the back, supposedly, and that kind of just simulates, here we go. And that kind of just simulates, the natural movement of people throughout this building, which there would be a lot of in real life, because you'd get many, many, many tourists and employees and everything going through this place. So it's not quite as jam-packed as I'd like in terms of like the number of people coming in and out, but it's still pretty good. It's there's a good density. And now we're doing these. These are some really old stone wall assets, but I think they look great. And I did want to use props because they're just way easier to use in this when it's elevated like this, as opposed to a network, because you don't have to grab nodes. You can just grab individual props in it. That's just something I'm a little more used to, and it's a little easier for me. And I think these assets actually look really nice. They've held up really well over the years that this game has been out. And I decided to just go along with the curve there that road has kind of created. And that's something I do over on the other side when I get to that eventually. And that just creates kind of a more natural flow in and out on the sides. So if you were to walk down one side of the building, it would kind of naturally curve you over into that pool area. And then if you kept going, it would do the same thing, and it would naturally curve you back out and send you back toward that main road that we built last episode with the bus lanes, which is something we're going to do later. And then just continuing with these tiles here. And I wasn't sure about mismatching these kind of tile textures between just the ground here and that pool, but I think it works kind of well. It kind of delineates the different areas that people can go here. So I think it's fine. And anyway, I wouldn't be able to match it between them no matter what I did, as far as I know. I don't think there's a way to do that. So yeah, I just ended up going with this, and I think it works pretty well. I think one thing you can do to really improve the detail in your cities is to have large areas of ground with different textures, because one of the ugliest things about the vanilla game is that you basically have like really dense buildings on concrete, and then you have wide open patches of grass, and that's pretty much the textures that you're limited to. But when you kind of break it up like this and have large swaths of tiled floor here, and then there are the different textures of road and the different textures of grass, and we do that with the theme and different props and trees and decals, and we kind of get it more into that later. But my point is that you can kind of use these things to make a more natural area, because in real life there are areas where there's kind of one texture that's just, at least at first glance, there's one texture that dominates an area. But if you look really closely, there isn't really anything in real life that's just like one solid color covering the ground. So that's one thing you can do to really just add some realism to your projects, is get these kind of shapes on the ground texture that are obviously man-made and not naturally occurring, rectangles and 90-degree angles and stuff like that, with your textures and your props and your walls and stuff. That's something that really just adds a lot of realism, because that's how things develop. Not everything is organic and curvy and natural looking. Whereas the game makes it pretty easy to get that kind of look, unless you're just building a dense gridded city. But if you're going for this more spread out look, that's definitely something you should try to do. And then here, I just love this kind of thing in this game, which is just slight differences in terrain, or in terrain height. So you get these little areas where you can't really do anything with the sloped area. So you can just put down a retaining wall like that, super easy. And that's something you see a lot in real life, but you don't really think about. But it adds just a nice depth to that kind of terrain, and it's pretty fun to build too in detail. Yeah, I just think that adds a lot. Also got to have fences. A lot of places are fenced off. Not as many as you might think, though. One thing I do, this is super dumb, but when I'm walking around, I'll look at buildings and see, where the fences are and where the different, if they're delineating between different properties and stuff, and how they do that. Sometimes it's as simple as, just a patch of grass or something in between a building. Sometimes there's, a tall fence or a wall or some, bushes or something. So it's kind of nice to get some variety in that. Like here on this side, I have that chain link fence, and we have those stone walls over on the other side, and you can just create a lot of variety with that and add some texture to your cities if you think about that kind of thing. Now we're just filling in the gaps here. There's a little dip there, so come in here and just flatten that out with a road. I love this concrete road. Just take the parking off, slap one down. You can make pretty much anything flat. Super versatile and really easy to use. That's definitely probably my most used road asset in this game. So now we're starting on with these awesome Cabana assets. I think these are also King Leno, and I just wanted to really pack it in here, because it is a resort and they cater to a lot of people, so they want to offer as much seating area as they can for these people. So it might be a little uncomfortable when you're there, but what are you going to do? And I tried to just have some variety with how the footrests are arranged, because these are things people get in them and they move them around and they end up, in different places and stuff. And so I wanted to kind of give just a little bit of life to it with that kind of thing and make it look like these are actually used. Obviously there aren't, Sims that go in and lie down in these, unfortunately. But they do, they walk around and they stand around. So you can imagine that at some point they, when you're not looking, they go into these and just relax. I bet the view off there would be pretty nice. Right now it's, well, I was talking about just solid colors on the ground. That's pretty much what you'd see. It's just pure green all the way to the mountains. But Someday we'll have that all filled in. This will probably actually have a nice view of the downtown area. I'm not exactly sure where that's going to go, but I think it's going to be somewhere across that little strait from here, so that should be a pretty cool view from here. And then just those little outcrops there, I guess you could call them, have some benches in there, and a couple of planters, just to add a little bit of privacy. I really like these fern assets because they're props, so you can raise them. And I've been doing a lot of stuff where I need to raise plants, and you can't do that with trees, as far as I know, beyond tree snapping, which I don't think I actually have. But it's a little, I think it's you have a little less control than you do with just using a prop. And those look pretty good, I think. So I've been using those quite a bit. And now we have these PPG tables, and people do actually kind of flock to these. They're pretty popular, but some of them don't have road connections based on wherever, the little arrow is pointing when you plop them down. So I do have to go back and remove some of those at some point. I just do that off camera. Yeah, and here we go, and now we're putting down some PPGs just to draw some people to the area. And that road that comes down it's on the left now off screen, but that road that comes down there is a service road, so police and fire and garbage and all the services can drive down there and access the PPGs and all that stuff. And so they're actually functional, which is nice, and they don't accumulate dead bodies or trash or anything like that. Because they do have access to services, which is kind of a big problem when you're trying to get this level of detail and kind of these vast spaces, because the game is so dependent on having road access for everything, because that's how the vanilla game works, and that makes sense. And here I'm struggling a little bit with these walls. That's really the one downside to these old props, is that they're not terrain conforming. And they're not networked, so they don't conform to the terrain in that way. But I still think it looks cool. That's another thing I've noticed with fences in real life, is that more often than not they'll actually be staggered like that, as opposed to being smooth to the ground. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't think it's too unrealistic. And now we're just doing another pathway here. I imagine this would be more of like a kind of a public place, a public entrance to this side of the resort. Even though it's just as accessible as the part with the tiles there. But I just think it's nice to have this little manicured area in between the resort there and the I guess it's a convention center that we're going to be detailing in a little bit here. Now I'm just doing these curb networks. I just think this adds, this just makes these make everything better. That's really all I can say. I don't want to say it's like a revolution in terms of detailing in this game, but it's just, oh my god, look at that. This is like the nerdiest thing I've ever done. Sorry. Alright, so we're going back to some foliage. That's pretty normal, I guess. I tried to keep a theme throughout the whole resort, really this whole area, with those lily pillies and the clusters there, and just a couple varieties of palms. And there's a roundabout here, even though it's only one road coming in and one road coming out. We do add a parking lot off of that later, so it's not completely useless. Also, it looks nicer than connecting two different widths of road together directly, which usually ends up with some weird looking stuff. So the roundabout helps with that. Alright, so here I was talking before about these cliff assets. I think they mesh really nicely with this mountain grass. It just looks like a nice rocky cliff that's not like super sheer. It has, it's shallow enough of a slope for grass to grow in it to kind of become overgrown a little bit, which is cool. And so here's that little park I was talking about. I imagine this is just a place you would go and park and walk down, and you could look out over the strait here and over to the main part of the island. It's pretty cool, and we add some mangrove trees here in a little bit, so that's another kind of point of interest here that people could come and see. I've just always wanted to put mangrove trees down in this game, because that's something I remember visiting Florida, seeing just like how amazing these mangrove forests are on the water. I mean, that's just it's such a cool thing, and they look pretty nice in game. So that's something we come back into in just a little bit. And here's a fence because you don't want people just drowning. That would be unfortunate. So we're going to fence along here. And again, textures are a big challenge in this game. As you can see, the path and the texture on it is fine, but the way it blends with the grass texture on the theme just is too abrupt. So I try to have these rocks kind of going over a little bit onto the path, and then we come back with those mangroves and some grass and really try to blend it in. Because in real life, when you go on unless it's more of like a garden, a path usually gets a little overgrown, a little rocky, especially where I live, like hiking in the mountains. The paths they aren't clean, and that's kind of the charm and the appeal of this type of thing. Is you go out and you feel like you're on just a game path or something. Like you're not treading on something that human beings have made. It's just something that kind of naturally, or it feels like has just naturally occurred here, and I think that really adds to the kind of the appeal of the location. And now we're going from that to a massive parking lot. Perfect. This one's actually pretty small. We're going to do a bigger one later for that little convention, that big convention center over there. But I was talking before about like shapes and textures and stuff on the ground. If you're going for a kind of a spread out city like this, I think parking lots are really like the number one thing you can do. That you find pretty much everywhere. That's one thing that I think the US does really well. Places are really, really, for the most part, accessible for people with disabilities, so that's something that I like to try to replicate here. Just coming back with the motif of this wall, I don't know, I like it. I like the look of that wall right up, butting up against the parking spots there. I just think that looks nice. That they kind of crammed it in right next to the highway there, and just tried to fit in as much parking space as they could in as little space as they had. Some more hedges. Continue that a lot throughout the area later. And here's that I'm calling it a convention center. I don't know what the asset is actually supposed to be, but I think it's a really nice, modern, nice, cool-looking building. And I think it looks like something you'd find in San Juan or a similar city. And we'll get to detailing that in a little bit. There's actually not too much in detail because it's a really nice, detailed asset, as you'll see. But we do a pretty cool parking lot and some stuff around the back. It's pretty nice and fill in all these blank areas. There's this little kind of cross here. That's just kind of a public area, and we'll go back to that, I think, in a little bit. Yeah, and these lamppost assets are awesome. I couldn't tell you who made them, but you can check out my asset list in the description. Be sure to check out all the linked collections because I've arranged it so that it's broken up into separate collections, so it's just a little easier to parse through. But definitely check that out. Find those lamppost assets. The guy, whoever makes them, makes a lot of really good assets like that. So if you're looking to switch up your lampposts, definitely go check that out. I've been pretty much keeping the same ones throughout the whole city, just to kind of keep a running theme. So I'm adding these entrances here to this convention center thing. And I'm not sure initially what I want to do in this kind of back area, but I do decide in just a little bit that I want to do a parking lot, because I imagine a big place like this would hold pretty big events. And there would be a parking lot ostensibly for this kind of place, so I just put it there. And it was inspired a little bit by places I've been, not necessarily a convention center exactly like this, but definitely, I've attended events on university campuses and stuff, where I just have a couple fairly distinct memories of walking from a parking lot in the evening into whatever building it was, and that memory didn't directly influence this, but it definitely that kind of feeling influenced how I made this. And you'll see in a little bit we have the handicap parking here, but we do add a little bit of a crosswalk through the parking lot, which is something that I like because it makes it, it increases the walkability of an area like this just a little bit, which is always a good thing when you can have that sort of victory against the parking lot. And here, maximizing the space again, and instead of adding some more spots here, we do that little crosswalk here, and it's as simple as a pedestrian path and a couple of line assets. And people do actually use this. They walk back and forth from their cars on the crosswalk and across to the convention center, and vice versa. It's actually pretty cool how simple it is and how well it works. Usually in this game, it's hard to do and it doesn't work at all. So it's nice to have something like this where it just kind of works out without having to mess around with it too much. And then we have, I'm not sure about these planters. The assets themselves are nice, but I don't know if they really fit. But when I built it, I guess I thought they did. So we'll see. Oh, and here's what I was talking about before, when you kind of use surface painter to take away the rounded edges to the parking lot roads. That is like that, and then throw a fence around it. Just do that everywhere, and you'll have a realistic city. No, but it definitely helps to kind of create those man-made shapes and textures and stuff, and that does add to the realism a lot, I think. Then I thought that maybe this whole resort and convention center is maybe run by one company, so all this. All the landscaping and foliage and that kind of stuff all kind of follows a similar theme, and I tried to keep it pretty consistent. It makes it more realistic, and it also makes it a lot easier to build, because then you only have to control one kind of like level of detail. If you need a bollard, you'd put this, and you don't have to worry about whether it fits or not, because it's gonna fit by the way you've designed it. Whereas if you have kind of a more eclectic collection of buildings and styles and ages, it's gonna be a lot harder to kind of blend everything together and keep track of what has what kind of detail. I might be rambling at this point, but I guess my point is that I wanted to make it a little easier on me to kind of keep track of all the different assets that I was using for this build, meaning mostly the hedges, the fences, the bollards, and the foliage. It was nice to just have a small palette of those to work from. All right, so then this is one thing that I actually really like is the sound barrier along the road here. I just think that works really nicely, and I don't know, the asset is honestly just like awesome. The level of detail in it is kind of insane when you look at it up close. You should definitely check that out. I think it's by Bad Idea on the Steam Workshop. Definitely check out my collection, and you can find it in there. And then I just have more of these hedges, and again, the networks, the pedestrian walkway networks naturally have kind of a curve to them at junctions and on the end, and the hedge really helps to kind of cut that off and make it a little more of a right angle kind of look, which really helps add to that man-made feel, even if you have it kind of curving around at points or, you know, looking a little more organic. Just those straight lines and right angles, throw a couple of those in, and it really adds to the realism. Here I wanted to kind of almost make it like a little bit of a garden, so that's nice. And then we're going back to the convention center here. I thought this side of the building was a little blank. I think it was intentionally designed that way. The asset creator, I think, says that you should clip it into other buildings, I believe. So I don't know, I thought they'd want, you know, maybe this is like office space, additional office space that they have that they rent out. And you know, the appeal of it is that you get to look out over the strait toward the city center. So there are some, you know, it's tall buildings, and they have windows and stuff and balconies. And then I just wanted to kind of blend it together with these little commercial assets. I think these are just vanilla. I think they actually look really nice. And then of course you have to go in with painter and change the roof colors so that they match. And then just throw one on the corner there. I imagine this is a little bit more of like a private access area. Like you can't get to this if you're just going to a convention here or something. You have to pretty much work here to be able to get back here. But so it's almost like a kind of a separate area, and that's one thing I've seen. I haven't, you know, traveled everywhere, but I've definitely been at like hotels and stuff that have office convention center, you know, convention hall or something, ballroom or office space where you can kind of walk by it, but you can't really get in unless you work there. I know where I live, there's a mall that, you know, there are a lot of stores, but there's also a lot of office space there, which is kind of weird. But that's just kind of a quirky thing I was trying to work in there. And of course, every place needs a dumpster. And you can kind of see that whole area here is really coming together pretty nicely. There aren't really any gaps, and that's one of the things I find hardest about this game is, you know, having these really nice detailed builds and then having tiny little gaps in between. What do you put in those? Trees are good. Trees are always good. So that's what I do here. I have those mangroves, as you can see, along the shoreline, and then just a little bit more of a standard forest here, just to kind of fill in the gap. And this side of the island there's actually going to be a lot of green space because there's this, just to kind of fill in the gap here, and then over just, yeah, right at the top of the screen now, you can see that green area. That's all going to be like not a national park. It's not iconic enough for that, but it's going to be like maybe a state, the equivalent of like a state park, or like maybe a city park that's pretty big, or maybe it's like a botanical garden type thing where it's a little bit more natural. You know, it's maintained, but it's made to be a little bit more natural and a little bit more meandering. It's not so much just a standard garden or as wild as like an untouched park, somewhere in between. But we'll do that later. Okay, now we're doing bus lines, which I'm so excited for. I just love, I mean, like I can just do this for hours in the game and you know, mess around with the bus lines and try to make them work better. And I do a lot of that off screen, but right now we're just placing the stops, and I have these bus stop assets that I just made a few of in the asset editor. I use some assets from the workshop that you can find in my collection again. I don't want to upload the actual stops I created to the workshop because it's pretty much just derivative of other people's work. Like there's the bus stop roof, which is one asset, and then I used some ads for the sides, and then benches and trash cans and stuff. I mean, it's all things that other people have created. So you can definitely go, if you want to make your own, check out my asset collection. You can download those and make it in the asset editor, and it saves a lot of time when you're in game because you can just grab it and find it and then drop it down, and you don't have to put together 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or more assets every time you make a bus stop. Because the vanilla bus stop structures are pretty awful. I just really don't like them. I don't like the style, and I don't like the texture on them. So that's definitely, if you want to get a nice detailed transit system in your city, that's definitely something to look into, is trying to make somewhat realistic stops. Even just these transit signs for, I think there are different ones for trams and buses and metros and stuff. Those add a lot. Okay, so that's it for this episode. I really hope you enjoyed watching me build this resort and that convention center. I know this was a really, really long episode. This is the longest episode I've ever done. But thank you so much. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time on Todos Santos, and we're actually going to be doing something a little different before the next episode of Todos Santos. Again, thanks for watching. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. See you next time on Todos Santos. Bye.